Hello and welcome to this webinar presented by the IET's Anglian Coastal Local Network, which represents members in Norfolk and Suffolk. Welcome also to folks from other parts of the UK and indeed globally, and I'm delighted to welcome you all. I am Kevin Foster and I'm Chairman of the Anglian Coastal IET Local Network, and I will be your host for this evening. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker. That's Alex Baker. Alex has been working around telecoms and contact centres for over 15 years. He's passionate about how emerging technology can help improve the way businesses interact with their customers. He's currently a solution architect working for Cognizant, one of the world's leading professional services companies. Alex has worked on various large transformations for major insurers and other enterprise clients, migrating their telephony estates to Cisco. He has delivered various projects for large government organizations, one of the largest contract centers in Europe being one of the examples. In 2017, he began to focus on Amazon Connect, the contact center offering. Some of his projects have included implementing a speech-based self-service IVR for healthcare organizations and helping clients to quickly stand up a home working capability for their contact centers during the first few weeks of the COVID pandemic. Alex lives in Norwich with his partner and their 2-year-old son. Outside of work, he enjoys cars, motor racing, and music, and playing bass guitar with a local band. Today, Alex will talk about the use of AI techniques to improve contact center experience for customers. So Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much for attending today, first of all. As Kevin said, my name's Alex Baker. I work for a large technology and consulting business called Cognizant. I sort of feel like I've spent my career misappropriating job titles that my father finds slightly contentious. So, as Kevin said, my current title is Solution Architect, but I know absolutely nothing about designing buildings. And in my previous role, I was called a consulting engineer, and I must profess, slightly embarrassingly to this crowd, that I have no engineering qualifications whatsoever. Anyway, with that admission out of the way, I hope you'll find some of my actual experience interesting. Now, the IT and telecoms industry is a bit notorious for using 3-letter acronyms and abbreviations, and Cognizant really embraces that and comes up with hundreds of its own as well to bring to the party. So I work in a part of the business called EASDCX. Now, don't worry about that too much, but it stands for Enterprise Application Services Digital Customer Experience. And probably the last part of that is most relevant in that as the ways people get in touch with businesses evolve, there's more of a focus towards customer experience rather than call center. And more on that a little bit later. So what are we going to cover? Well, first of all, we'll look at what is a contact center. And how they've evolved over the last few years. Then we'll go on to talk about what are some of the barriers that have maybe prevented contact centers from doing something about bad customer experience. I'll talk a little bit about that buzzword, the cloud, what it can give us and why I love it. I work mainly on one of the main cloud providers, Amazon Web Services. So I'll tell you about a couple of the things that they offer. There's also a concept within cloud computing called serverless, which is quite an important concept and which can make our life a little bit easier. And serverless technology can help us to implement cool things over and above your basic call center. I'm going to give you a few examples in the form of demos and talk you through what's going on behind the scenes. And then finally, we'll wrap things up and we'll head into the Q&A session. So what is a contact center or call center? Well, for me, this is the sort of image that's conjured up in my mind. I've spent quite a lot of time walking around buildings like this quite often late at night or into the early hours of the morning. Contact centers are there to service the many needs of customers who have to get in touch with businesses or with organizations. Unfortunately, call centers can sometimes get a bit of stick, though. So, too many people seem to have had bad experiences, maybe with high wait times, or quite often not being able to get to the right person to deal with their query easily enough. And sometimes that is purely down to the fact that a business just does not have enough bums on seats to meet that incoming demand. Some of the government departments are good examples of this. So where they have a potential customer base of a large part of the whole population, it's actually really difficult to staff for that level of demand. Luckily, though, there are potential technology solutions which can help improve things for the callers and also for the hundreds of thousands of staff who work in contact centres across the UK. Let's move on to talk a bit about the evolution of the contact centre. So where we were a few years ago over to where we would perhaps like things to be. Starting from over on the left-hand side, we really are talking about call center rather than contact center. So voice only, no other channels. When I talk about channels, I basically mean different routes into the contact center. So voice, phone, but then also maybe chat or email, and increasingly now things like Facebook or Twitter. They're all examples of channels. There may be some simple IVR. So here's another one of those three-letter abbreviations that I mentioned. IVR stands for interactive voice response, but you're probably familiar with it being the press 1 for sales, 2 for service, or 9 to be cut off and have to go through the whole hellish experience again. And then we've got CTI. So CTI is computer telephony integration. And at this early stage on the left here, it's probably having some sort of soft phone on the agent's computer, so linking telephone and computer a little bit. Then moving on to the next stage, towards what we think of as the contact center. So away from just voice, just the phone channel, we're probably introducing a couple of other channels, maybe email and maybe a basic web chat. And we might also expand on that, the computer telephony integration that I mentioned with what's known as an agent desktop, which is an application where the agent handles calls, but also the contacts from the other channels, like the chats that might be coming in. And it's usually somewhere between here and the next stage that I tend to find most of my clients. So for a lot of contact centers right now, the future starts at omnichannel. What do I mean by omnichannel? The omnichannel for me is providing consistency in the experience, regardless of contact channel and across multiple contacts. So multiple times of calling in or opening a chat with that organization. And the big thing for me here is that you shouldn't feel like an unknown every time you call in. Companies generally know enough about us that they shouldn't have to go right back to basics every time we get in touch. And great customer experience, great experience shouldn't be limited to the caller either, right? The agent on the other end of the phone should have a full overview of the customer, including previous interactions. How frustrating is it having to explain things multiple times to a whole host of different advisors that you call in and talk to? On to the next stage then. So customer engagement is about maintaining customers by increasing customer satisfaction and making it easy for them to do business with us. We might start to bring in more personalization, so predicting why people might be calling and perhaps greeting them in a bit more of a personable fashion. and also starting to offer some self-service options. And also by now, we're probably taking in quite a lot of data about callers and about how they engage with us. So we can take advantage of that data to further improve how we engage with callers. And we're probably looking at contact center and CRM software, that's customer relationship management, perhaps more as one linked platform now, where previously they were probably separate and probably didn't really talk to each other. Finally, moving towards what we're showing as next generation. We're sort of meeting the customers where they are, integrating with their lifestyle. So maybe integration with Alexa or Google Home, maybe offering video calls, or perhaps visual IVR menus that you might navigate on a smartphone. And we take the personalization to the next level, so using the data about the caller and behavioral trends to suggest next best actions and improve the call resolution time. And while I refer to in the diagram to that being the future, it is actually all technology that's available now. So that's all good and well. There's plenty of technology around to help, right? So why then, when we make contact with some businesses, is it still such an uphill battle to actually achieve anything? Well, traditionally, there were always, I think, a few major barriers to change and to innovation. And firstly, as is quite often the case, it came down to cost. On the technology stack where I began my career, it used to be that to set up a call center, you need a pretty hefty investment in servers and physical equipment. Then you need to make another sizable investment in licenses. And we're probably talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds. Then a couple of months later down the line, when you'd actually procured all that, you probably need a couple of teams of people to set it all up. Because the platform was made of many components, all of them pretty complex, you'd probably need to get a few different resources aligned just to sort of put it all together, connect it to the outside world, and to actually make it all work together. The combination of those first two factors usually meant that it actually took a pretty long time to achieve anything. And that was also true not only for that initial sort of build of a new call center, but also for adding new functionality. So anything like that was also a really significant investment in time and money. So you had to be pretty serious about wanting to try new things and to innovate. And the final compounding factor is it was often quite difficult to get separate systems to talk to one another. Sometimes it just wasn't possible, or maybe other times the vendors would sort of keep it all a bit secretive, so that you might have to then pay them many more thousands of pounds to help sort of put everything together and make it work. And those initial barriers to entry really meant that any innovation was pretty stifled, and companies sometimes just tended to make do. And that leads me on to talking a bit more about the cloud and the one main reason that I really sort of love what it's all about. So bearing in mind that old world I just spoke about, what really grabbed me about cloud technology is that I, as an individual, can take my credit card and I can set up a contact center within minutes, literally that quick. I can then immediately get down to the innovation part, so bolting on things like speech analytics, voice biometrics, stuff that in the old world would have required another 250,000 just to start looking into. And it's that freedom to innovate that I absolutely love, and that I think can really help businesses do more to delight their customers who get in touch with them. What is the cloud? Well, I always think of it as rather than using your own computer to do something, you're just using the internet to borrow someone else's much better computer for a while, which can probably do hundreds more things than yours can. And what are some of the benefits of using cloud services? Well, firstly, it's set up so that you can scale your operations up or down completely at will. And that's amazing for a business like a call center who probably has peaks and troughs in demand throughout the year. Next, the payment model is generally pay as you go. So there's none of that upfront purchases of licenses that I mentioned, and there's no long-term commitment either. So in the old world, it might be that you were tied in for 1 to 5 years of license terms. And those points, they mean that it's actually possible to set something up quickly, try it out, and prove its value. It also provides a pretty open platform, so allowing lots of different services to talk to one another. And effectively, you gain a bunch of building blocks that you can use together to build bigger and better things. And because of that, there's also a big network of partners who sort of bring their own innovations to the party, further sort of expanding on those the building blocks that I mentioned. Now, other cloud providers are available, but the one I use the most is the cloud computing subsidiary of Amazon Online Retail, Amazon Web Services, known as AWS. There are over 170 AWS services live today, so we really don't have time to go into what all of them do. But at a high level, these are just a few things that AWS offer. So there's storage, first of all. If you've ever used something like Dropbox, you'll be familiar with cloud storage. So taking your files and storing them within the cloud rather than on your own personal computer. Then databases. AWS have a multitude of different databases for different purposes. Analytics as well. So Amazon are massive on using data to improve their business. And as such, they offer loads of ways to collect, collate, visualize, and leverage data of all types. There are services for messaging, whether that's email or text messages. And some of the really cool stuff for me, services around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And within this context of the contact center, there's one service called Transcribe, which can convert speech into text. And then there's another one called Comprehend, which can analyze that text. It can determine key phrases, trends, and even sentiment. And amongst these, there's a contact center service called Amazon Connect. Now, Connect does all the things that a contact center needs to do. So it provides phone numbers for customers to reach you on. It allows you to configure contact center agents and to group them into queues to take different types of calls. And you can add all of your messaging and your menus and the sort of call routing logic that callers would hear as they dial into your call center. And once it's all configured, your agents can log into it on their computer from anywhere and take calls. Easy. And I mentioned this earlier, but you can set it up in minutes and it costs you nothing to set up. So in a moment, I'm going to stop talking for a second and show you a demo, but there's one more concept I just want to quickly mention, just because it's kind of the glue that sticks together our building blocks of all the other services. We have Connect, which is our contact center service, but we want to maybe get Connect to talk to another service, another AWS service, perhaps a database. And to do that, we need to run a small piece of code to pass a message from one service to another and do that communication between the two. In the past, we probably would have needed some sort of server on which to run our piece of code. And having that server brings with it some level of configuration, ongoing maintenance, and also running costs. But handily, Amazon provide another service where you can just take away the server and you can run pieces of code in the cloud serverlessly. So you just enter your snippets of code and the service runs it for you. You're only billed for that fraction of a second that it takes to run the piece of code, and then it switches off and comes back when you next need it again. And that service is called Lambda. Let's start to pull some of these services together then. So this is quite a simple example, but it's one that I have spoken to quite a lot of customers about recently, and it deals with where is my order type questions. So somebody might call a logistics company asking for an update. The logistics company has their details from dealing with them in the past, and the customer has a tracking reference number for their order. And anecdotally, my brother-in-law works for a logistics company, and he reckons he spends on average half an hour to an hour a day just looking up the status of people's orders. So, you know, how good would it be if he could automate that process and get that half an hour back every day? And at this point, let's jump into the quick demo. Sorry, bear with me. Let me sort out my laser pointer problem.
Welcome to AB Logistics. How can I help?
Where is my order?
Please, can you tell me your order reference number?
312-817-657.
Great news. Your order consisting of 2 pallets is out for delivery. We can't provide an exact delivery time, but it should be with you in the afternoon. I can send the approximate location of your delivery to you via text, so you can see how far away it is. Would you like me to do that?
Yes.
That should be on its way to you now. Hopefully that has helped. Do you need to speak to a colleague about your order?
No.
Okay, thanks for calling AB Logistics. Goodbye.
Okay, there we go. So having heard that demo, here's a high-level architecture diagram showing the different components being used in the demo. And I appreciate that that may not actually mean a great deal as it is, so let me take you through it in steps. I'm just going to highlight a few things happening at each step, the components used, and also what some of the potential benefits to the business are. Right, step 1. And this is where the call was connected, I was greeted and was asked the reason for my call. So there are a couple of components involved at this stage. Amazon Connect being the first one, and the second one being one called Lex. So Amazon Connect is, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of the core contact center routing engine, if you like. So it's taking the calls and it's handling them and it's making decisions on how to best route it. And this other service called Lex is providing us that conversational interface for the caller to interact with. So we're doing away with our usual press 1, press 2 menu systems. Now, that conversational interface provides the first potential business benefits that I want to highlight. And firstly, and it is a big if it's implemented well, it can improve customer experience and it can save the caller time. So rather than navigating a rigid set of numerical options, a caller can simply state straight away the reason for their call. And secondly, it can also, more for the business rather than for the customer, it can give a rich insight into why people are actually calling. So rather than sort of making a guess at what our press 1, 2, 3 options should be, we can actually delve a bit into the data that's coming in. We can find out exactly what people want, what they're asking for, and we can then sort of tailor the onwards routing accordingly. And we can also potentially identify trends or even the emotions of callers before they've got to talking to a live agent. So step 2 then, having determined that I want to know the status of my order, the system prompted me for my reference number. And using that, it performs a lookup to a database. And that the main components here are Lambda and DynamoDB. Lambda is the one we mentioned already, and this is where we're running that little piece of code serverlessly during the call flow and integrating with an external service or data source. And that data source in this case is a database hosted within Amazon Web Services called DynamoDB. And like I say, the Lambda function, it really is that sort of connecting piece or glue between the other services, other sources of data. So where we have in this demo, we've got this DynamoDB database. Equally, it could be a CRM system, like some of the big ones, Salesforce, for example, or a company's own order database, or maybe a service management tool. And if we can access that useful data, we can then introduce the concept of automation. So we still haven't introduced a live agent yet, but we're already making steps towards helping the caller with their query. Step 3 then. So after looking at my order information from the database, the system reports back with what it knows about my order. And from the database, it's determined things like the dispatch status, the delivery date, and maybe whether it's due in a morning or afternoon delivery slot. Having passed that information back to me verbally, Connect can see that I called in from a mobile phone, and Lex asked me if I'd like that courier location sent to me via a text message. When I answer yes, we have another little call off to Lambda with one of our pieces of serverless code, and that triggers an integration to another service, which is called Simple Notification Service, and that fires the text message off to my mobile phone. And here's what comes through to my mobile in that case. So Simple Notification Service has sent the response back to me, comprised of some of the data that was there in the database. In this particular example, I've just put a Google Maps link with some map coordinates, but if the logistics company had maybe a vehicle tracking system, you could look at pulling data from that and combining that and sending it off to the caller. Having ended that call, then the caller has got what they want quickly without having to navigate multiple options in the menu and possibly multiple levels of menu options as well. And also, and perhaps most sort of importantly for their time, they haven't had to join a queue and sit there for 5, 10, 15 minutes waiting for an advisor to actually take their call. And I was on the phone for around a minute, and that's a minute which has been saved from one of the contact center's live agents, and they can be doing better things with. Just to wrap it up then, that was a bit of a generic demo, but it was based on some real life observations. Lower complexity calls can make up a pretty large percentage of call volume into a contact center. And I think there's probably pretty big scope to try and automate more of them, as long as it's done well and implemented so that it's a help rather than a hindrance to the caller. I've mentioned improving customer experience by giving customers what they want as quickly as possible. and that extends to the fact that an automated service can also be offered outside of normal working hours, which potentially works around the customer's lifestyle, and also has the additional benefit of reducing load on the staff within the normal opening hours. And as well as helping out our customer, it means that the agents have fewer repetitive tasks to have to deal with. One customer that I worked with recently has a really good grasp of how much agent time is worth financially. So, the cost of one agent per hour, for example. So it was pretty easy to calculate that if we were able to automate X number of minutes per month, it would equate to Y in cost savings. And for that particular client, just for actually quite a small single line of business in their call center, they estimated it was up to around £3,000 a month. And the final point, when implementing a new system like this, it does produce quite a lot of rich data pretty quickly when you've got a lot of calls coming in every day. And that can be used after going live with the system to tune and improve the service. And what I mean by tuning is to analyze the things that callers are saying to the system and capturing any of those utterances that the system initially might not understand, and feeding them into the system to sort of increase that level of understanding. And by doing that, you increase the efficiency of the system and reduce the potential for errors. As an example of that, I set up a speech IVR like this for a client, and through tuning for a period of 6 or 8 weeks afterwards, I was able to improve the error rate within the application from 15% at the start down to just over 2% over the 6 weeks, and also reduced the percentage of callers who are hanging up within the speech application from 10% to under 5%. So we've covered a couple of additional services that you might want to sort of utilize and bring in to supplement your basic contact center. So we touched on dipping into external databases, and we've replaced our press 1, press 2 menu for a speech recognition one. And we also started sending text messages automatically. So good stuff so far. But now we've knocked down our barriers to innovation, what else could we be thinking about giving a try in our call center? Well, there are a whole host of possibilities, right? But let me tell you just a little bit about 2 things which I think are pretty cool and high tech. And these 2, as well as the speech recognition system that we just saw, they would have been some of the most expensive and difficult ones to really try out in the old legacy world. But now in the cloud, we can try them out much more easily and cheaply. And I already alluded to these earlier, and if you were wondering at the time what I meant, let's shed a little bit more light on them. The first one we're going to look at is voice biometrics, and then the second one I'll come on to is speech analytics. Voice biometrics then. Voice biometrics is the practice of using a caller's voice print as a means of identification. So it analyzes the unique characteristics of a person's voice, which means there's less need for passwords, PINs, dates of birth, mother's maiden names. When you enroll with voice biometrics, usually as a caller, you're asked to register your voice print first. So often the caller must repeat a passphrase a few times, something like "my voice is my password," for example. The organization then stores that voice print, or at least the characteristics of it, and matches subsequent ID attempts against it. And it used to be most common for a caller to re-authenticate using that same passphrase. However, passive authentication is now being offered more frequently. And that's where the the biometric system can analyze the caller's voice during any passage of speech that might be happening in the initial IVR layer or when speaking to a live agent. Many massive public and private sector organizations have been adopting voice biometrics because of the potential for better security. And just a couple that I know of are HMRC and also HSBC. They're both two pretty high profile users. And voice biometrics lends itself well to that kind of organization. They need robust security measures due to the nature of their calls, and voice biometrics can introduce an additional factor of authentication. So what are some of the benefits? I mean, the obvious one, as I mentioned, is security. Once an individual has been verified conventionally and then enrolled in voice biometrics, during any subsequent calls, you can be more certain that they are who they say they are. The effect it can have on customer experience is maybe a bit more subjective, but my own perception is that being biometrically verified within the IVR is preferable and probably more consistent than the sort of questioning and mother's maiden names questions by a live agent. I think that the positive experience is further enhanced when introducing passive authentication. So you can be being verified without actually knowing it's happening, giving a totally seamless verification process. And aside from the customer experience, removing the verification process can also have a positive effect on your agent's experience. So there's potentially 30 seconds of repetitive activity at the start of every call, which if you get rid of, your agents are freed up to get to the important stuff, which is resolving matters more quickly for your customers. And of course, if your call handling times can be reduced, there's potentially the opportunity to reduce your costs and to speed up the return on investment for that voice biometrics system. Like I said, this was another service which until recently was pretty expensive to implement, but now it's possible to get started with it with no capital expenditure and also on a pay-as-you-go payment model. So if anyone fancies giving it a try, I've set up a little demo of it. My friends over at a company called AccuLab have given me access to a demo voice biometrics environment. So if this is a little rough and ready, it's my fault, because you usually go through some fairly stringent testing when you actually put in a service like this, and I've kind of thrown this together in a few hours. But I've set up my own voice print, and you can try and dial in and authenticate as me just to see if you can get past the system. So to do it, simply dial the number on the screen there. It's just a standard local rate UK number, and this is just a demo setup. I'm not going to do anything with the information other than be quite interested if anyone can get through the biometric system. You'll hear a few instructions. All you need to do is wait until the beep and then say that the passphrase, which is "with voice password, my voice will let me in." And if you manage to verify successfully, you'll hear a code word. And if you do, make a note of that code word, and we'll compare notes in the Q&A and see how many people, if any, could actually pass through the biometrics verification. And if you're able to make it through, it would be quite useful for me, so I can sort of tune the sensitivity of it and make it more secure for next time. And one final point, if you do try and call in, there's a limit to the number of simultaneous calls that will be accepted. So if you don't get through immediately, feel free to give it a try again in a couple of minutes. So moving on to the second service I mentioned, and that is speech analytics. And speech analytics takes a recording of a call, or maybe just a piece of text like a web chat or an email, and run some analysis on it. And that allows you to get a number of insights, including tracking keywords. So, for example, you could set a rule which looks for the word complaint in any call recording, and you could then revisit them to have a listen and figure out, why were people unhappy? Do we need to get back to them and do something about it? That it's also potentially useful for compliance purposes. So, for example, a financial services organization, quite often they're required to read a certain message to callers when giving financial advice. So a rule could be set to flag any calls where that has not taken place. The caller could be called back to rectify the issue and have it re-recorded so you can be sure that you're fully compliant. Another cool feature of speech analytics is sentiment detection. So the system can detect if the overall sentiment of the speaker is tending towards the negative or towards the positive, which again is another great thing to flag in order to identify unhappy customers who need a bit of TLC and further attention, or maybe to explore what seems to be the sort of formula for a happy call. A good example of where an agent has served a customer really well. Quality monitoring in a contact center used to often be quite a manual process. So supervisors would need to manually listen to a percentage of calls in order to try and pick up on issues. And it was always quite a scattergun approach, quite at random and very laborious as well. And with sentiment analysis, you can potentially automate some of that process and make it much more effective and actually target the calls that need to be given more attention. And you can also, you can do it in real time as well. So potentially a supervisor might be able to see a call in place that is tending towards the negative, and they might be able to sort of barge in on the call and help the agent, or set up a chat with them to try and coach them through. So let's take another quick look at a demo. I'm going to run one more just to show you these couple of other services that I've been talking about. We've kept a couple of the previous concepts in the next demo, where we're using speech recognition still, and we're doing a data dip into a database to look up the caller's details against their phone number. And we're greeting the caller by name and asking the reason for their call. And then in the demo, I'm going to ask to speak to an agent. And this is where voice biometrics has been put into the demo. So I'll be asked if I want to verify biometrically. And once the call's been connected, then in order to demonstrate the speech analytics, I've just talked for a minute. So there's a bit of something for the system to pick up on. And after the call is finished, the video will jump straight into the call recording portal. We're going to take a quick look at the analysis results.
Welcome to the IT help desk. Am I speaking to Alex?
Yes.
Hi. Welcome back, Alex. How can I help you today?
I'd like to speak to an agent.
That's great. Thanks. Now, in just a few words, please tell me a few more details about your request.
Speech analytics.
Thanks. Right. Let me put you through to a colleague who can help you. It looks like you have a voice print set up. Would you like me to confirm your identity now?
Yes.
Okay. I am now going to verify your voice. After the beep, please say, with voice password, my voice will let me in.
With voice password, my voice will let me in.
Thank you. You have been successfully verified. Thanks for waiting. Someone will be with you as soon as possible. I can schedule someone to call you back when they become available.
Hi. Yes, it's Alex here. I'm just making a test call to demonstrate speech analytics. I think it's a really awesome service, and it could help supervisors in contact centers to monitor and assess quality in their business. I'm running a webinar for the Institute of Engineering and Technology, and it's been really good fun showing some of the cool things we can do with the cloud. That's it from me. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so we've jumped straight into the call recording portal now. We're doing a quick search for the call. So the one at the top there is the one that I recorded earlier on today. We're bringing up the call record, so we'll whiz through this quite quickly, but on the left-hand side, we can see some general information about the call. You've got a unique contact ID, we've got the start and end time, we've got the customer's phone number, and also the queue that the call came in on. Then we've got some information about the sentiment which has been detected. So the line graph shows the sentiment swing through the call, and the green graph shows that it's been an overall positive call. Then the yellow and blue bar graph shows how much time was talking. Sorry, let me just pause it before it moves on. From both the customer and the agent side, and how much was silence. Now, this one's showing quite a lot of silence, quite a lot of non-talk time, because I've made the call, there's no agent on the other end, but a lot of silence might be an indication that maybe the advisor is sort of scratching around on their computer trying to find the correct source of information to refer to, and maybe there's just a slight training issue that that might need to be looked at. I'm just going to hit play on the video again. We're scrolling down now. We've got a transcript of the call. We can see that by and large, it's picked up actually a pretty accurate transcription. It's detected a couple of slight differences to what I said, but overall pretty good. You can see it's picked up on me saying that I'm running the webinar for the IET there. And scrolling down a bit further, we can see that there are a whole load of attributes also tagged to the call. So I'm just going to pause again. This is from the initial part of the interaction before connecting to the advisor. So some of it's from that data dip that we performed. Some is stuff that we're collecting from the caller. So you can see one slight error there where I said the original reason for the call was speech analytics. It's picked up speak to Analympics. So there's a few inaccuracies, but overall we can derive quite a lot of useful information about the call, all completely automatically. And the second call that I'm just diving into now, you can see I'm going to type in a keyword, in this case, complaint. I'm doing a search through the call recordings that are available, and there's a call there, which is a call where somebody's mentioned complaint. And if we dive into it, we can see our graphs here. The sentiment is overall negative. There's quite a bit of non-talk time as well, but yeah, you know, this is looking like an overall negative call that we need to look at. You can see that there's some fairly negative phrases there, like poor service, real problem, really disappointed, want to make a complaint. So quite an extreme example, but hopefully demonstrates the point about the speech analytics system. So yeah, hopefully, as you can see, there's maybe a few inaccuracies there, but overall we can derive a lot of useful information about the call, but crucially, it's completely automatically, so there's no sort of manual call listening process there. Okay, so I'm nearly at the end of my presentation. So let's just take a minute or two to wrap things up before we head into the Q&A. And I noticed, just keeping one eye on my phone there, it seems like a few people might have immediately found out how to cheat the system. So we'll hopefully come on to that in the Q&A. But thank you so much for taking the time to attend this evening. I know perhaps call centres might not seem like the most exciting of subjects on the face of it, but genuinely, I think there's some really interesting technology behind the scenes, and hopefully you found this session useful and insightful. And whilst I feel like I've hardly scratched the surface of some of the topics we've talked about, if you have any questions or need any clarification about anything and we aren't able to get round to it in the Q&A, please feel free to get in touch via my email address listed at the bottom. And finally, next time you have a less than great experience when getting in touch with a call centre, please take it easy on the person who answers the phone. As with a lot of frontline customer service roles, contact centre staff are unfortunately front and centre for criticism, which quite often is not their fault. So it's estimated that over 85% of contact centres are yet to transform to some of this next gen technology. So there's a bit of a way to go yet. Thanks again, everyone, and let me pass over to George, who I think is running the Q&A.
I'm going to look at the questions, but I think what I'll do is I'll leap straight to the voice biometrics, since you've raised that one, Alex. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to summarize some of the points that people are making. Captain Bird's Nest said, was anyone quick enough to record Alex's voice as he said the phrase? Alan Pickwick said, code word bicycle. Roger Clark failed to beat it. Graham Diacon found code word bicycle. There's about, who else got bicycle? Harry Heathfield, James Guyton, Rob G, Alan B, and so on. Maybe you could give a view as to how so many people were successful there.
Yeah, I'll try my best. So I'd be interested to know if, well, did anyone, I think there was mention of somebody recording my voice and using that to beat the system, which I think, you know, it's a valid concern, and one that in a real production implementation, that's the sort of thing that you should be testing against. And I mentioned there's a level of confidence scoring that is against any successful verification attempt, and you'd want to sort of do enough testing such that you are happy that you're not getting people able to beat the system in that way. So yeah, I'd love some feedback on whether any were recordings of my voice or whether a lot were genuinely just people that have managed to get through the system.
Okay, shall I suggest that they use your email address, Alex, to
yeah, please do
with you on that?
Yeah, that's fine if they'd like to. And like I said, it was a demo that I threw together in a few hours. So by no means as stringent as a full sort of production system would have to be. So yeah, I'd definitely like to review those findings and see what happened really.
Okay, so let's move on to the questions at large then. And Brian Buckman asks, I work in an environment where mobile phone SMS is a significant method of communication. And do any contact center providers properly support SMS? Now, I guess that he'd be looking for a definition of what proper support for SMS might be.
Yeah, I definitely would need a bit more definition perhaps, but yes, in short, I mean, at my company, we are able to sort of fully integrate two-way SMS. So add that as another channel, as I mentioned at the front end of the call. So rather than voice or chat, you can interact solely via SMS. And that would tend to come in looking like a web chat to the agent. So it's just another text-based interaction, and it would potentially enter a queue which it would be dealt with in the same way as a web chat as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Question from Mike, and who notes that there is extensive use of cloud by financial sector, but what are your expectations for its use by UK Ministry of Defence to handle classified material, both information and data?
Yeah, good question, Mike. So financial sector wise and government wise, I've done a bit of work in the past for HMRC, and they were particularly rigorous in their requirements for data security. So wherever there was data stored that had sort of personal identifiable information within it, people that had access to that level of data had to be security cleared to start with, and all of that data had to be stored in a specially secured environment. So yes, it was taken very seriously, and I haven't done any work for the MOD, but I can only assume it would be that level of stringency and more for that kind of data. And you know, the level of clearance that I had to undertake to work on HMRC is probably nothing compared to the likes of MOD.
I've got a couple of questions which are really developments on this is from Steve Phillips and Stephen Laity, who ask, how are data protected in the cloud, and how do you ensure the confidentiality in terms of business information operating in the cloud? And also from Stephen Laity, beyond that, how are experiences shared between users on the cloud? So confidentiality where it's appropriate, and sharing, how is that enabled?
Yeah, sure. Two good and related questions to the last point, really. So the sort of confidentiality of data does come up a lot with discussions with my customers. So wherever we're capturing data that potentially has PII, personal identifiable information, within it, we always have to figure out how we treat that data, how we use it, whether we can store it or whether it's best to use it and then obscure it or remove it. So one example that comes to mind is credit card data is obviously very sensitive, and that's the type of data that we wouldn't ever want to store it at all. We would use the data securely with an application that speaks directly to the payment gateway provider and makes that payment, and the agent never has any visibility of it. So yeah, data security is always a real key consideration, and questions around data sovereignty as well. So where I mentioned the government organizations, a lot of them are very strict about where the data actually resides. So where you have cloud providers like Amazon Web Services that operate in different geographical regions, you have to be very careful at the design phase that you identify where the data is coming from, where it transitions, which regions it transitions between, and where it ultimately resides, and what you do with it, and who has access to it. I hope that that answers a couple of those questions.
Thank you, Alex. Question from Kev. How does Amazon Connect Lex determine the language of the caller? Is that automatic?
So with Lex, you would need to put sort of provisions in place to try and identify the potential language of the caller to start with, potentially. So if I had a call center that was servicing calls from, say, the UK and France, I might initially look at the caller ID of the incoming call to try and figure out, this is a call from France, it's more likely to need French language treatment. Now, I appreciate that isn't a perfect way of dealing with it, but you might be able to push a majority of the right calls to the right place. But at that point, no, Lex doesn't automatically pick up on the language, so you'd have to do something first of all to try and determine that and try and start the interaction in a language that the caller can return in.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Questions from Doug and Chris, which are a bit related, and they relate to the need to access competent human beings at certain stages. Chris thinks that given the delay in replies on web chat with real people, are operatives servicing too many calls at once? And Doug pleads that more emphasis should be put on the area of human contact and managing that effectively. So how can you do that? How can you make these things more effective, the interaction with people? Yeah,
I mean, let me take Chris's question first. So Chris's is a bit of a shorter answer in that, yes, Chris, quite often web chats are, because they're not as real time as voice, or you know, that's the perception of them. Yes, people are handling 4, maybe 5 at a time, and you do pick up on there being a bit of a delay when the advisors are going between the chats. And the other question, frankly, sometimes it does just come down to the fact that a company does not have enough trained individuals to be able to answer all the queries with a live advisor who's equipped to do so. So all I can do, all we can do in this industry is try and put in the best provision for. So if we don't have a live agent to route a call to, what else might we be able to do to at least take away some of that call volume and make sure that some of those lower complexity transactions are taken away from the live agent. And I admit myself, sometimes we don't get it right, and sometimes it's down to the organizations that haven't made changes to these systems for quite some time, and could probably do with a bit of a review.
Great, thanks, Alex. Question from Mike. What steps are being taken in AI algorithm telephony to understand those with speech impediments, disabilities, or merely those at an age where their hearing isn't as sharp or their speech is often misinterpreted? Such difficulties often result in caller frustration, calls being ended without an inquiry being resolved. So what steps are being taken?
Yeah, so another good question, Mike. And I suppose as best practice, I would always recommend that nobody is ever stuck completely in an automated system. And if they're, for whatever reason, unable to hear properly what the system is saying, or that the system can't understand what they're saying, it should be fairly quick, maybe 1 or 2 attempts, after which they're at least put into a queue for a live agent, and potentially prioritized as well. I gave the example of sentiment analysis within that IVR layer. So potentially if callers are sounding distressed, you might be able to pick up on that and prioritize their routing to a live agent. So yeah, always try and have a fallback, really.
Thanks, Alex. James Guyton asks an interesting question. He notes that in the demonstration, the caller says, "Where is my order?" For James, it highlights that they need to know how to appeal to the AI system interpreting the query, rather than understanding how one would normally speak to a human being. So how does it work when the query is more than the caller can sum up in a brief request?
Yeah, another really good one, James. And I suppose 2 points really. So one around the tuning aspect that I mentioned earlier on. So probably to start with, when putting in a system like this, I tend towards having some of the more simple and straightforward utterances put into the natural language understanding system, but then look to run some tuning on that. So see what are the phrases that are coming into the system that aren't being recognized under any of the sort of structured intents or menu options, if you like. And then any of the longer, more complex requests, tried to sort of work into the system throughout that period of tuning. And also, similar to the previous one, always try and have that fallback option. So somebody there may be prompted to ask the question a different way, so that the system might say, "I didn't understand, but you could try asking these things." And if they're still unable to understand one another, then make sure it's pushed out to a live agent to be dealt with as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. A question from SNL. What sort of cost is involved in Amazon Web Services provision for small and medium businesses?
Yeah, I mean, cost-wise, so I suppose that the headline figure that I mentioned in terms of actually setting it up is a lot of the Amazon Web Services stuff, you can literally get yourself an account with your own credit card, and they have a lot of free tier services, including Amazon Connect. So you can set it up and you can try it for a certain limited number of minutes per month for free. I've got my own sort of development account, and I I use it a fair bit for demos and things, and it's rarely more than sort of $4 or $5 a month. But then if you're if you're ramping it up into production, then you can model the cost because it's all a sort of per minute of interaction. So if you had some idea of the call volumes that are coming into your business and the number of agents you have, I could help you out, or you could sort of find it from the publicly available AWS pricing pages, and figure out this is going to cost me roughly this amount per month.
Okay, I think we're getting close to the end of our allotted time, and I've got a very interesting question from Stella Tamaklo, and it is, what use do companies get from monitoring my emotions? How can this information be kept secure? And if the company decides that Peter is a difficult customer, there do seem to be some ethical issues.
Yeah, really good question. So I suppose maybe back to the security and data security point that we had earlier on. So I'd also always recommend that if at all possible, we try and sort of depersonalize some of those interactions when it comes down to the sentiment analysis. So we keep it as we're routing on the base of sentiment analysis, but it would be perhaps immoral to then sort of flag somebody as a problem customer because of it. I'd like to think that we could use it to the positive and see why a particular customer is unhappy and work with them to try and resolve that.
Okay, maybe a final question. Graham Diacon asks, you mentioned chat several times, and he asks, why do companies offer this? I find it desperately time consuming. Irrelevant questions are often asked, which a brief conversation would tell an agent that they were unnecessary. Response cycle is often very slow. He often feels it's chosen because it's convenient for the call center and customer experience is not taken into account. I don't know if you've got any observations on that. Why?
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, to be frank, Graham, it can often be because the perception is that more incoming contacts can be serviced that way, and there's the slightly less real-time aspect to it. So you can perhaps take 5 contacts at once and slightly delay the response back to them, and still sort of get through the contact eventually. But yeah, I feel your pain, and I think, like with any of these methods, it needs to be implemented well in order to have a positive effect on customer experience. And if it is just for trying to take massive volumes of phone calls and then put them into the chat channel with the same number of agents, it probably just doing that is not going to have a good experience, or not going to make a good experience for the customer. So yeah, like with all these things, I think you have to carefully consider how it's implemented.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Alex. Alex, that's a great presentation, and I really appreciate, can better appreciate the complexities of the contact center now. And you've put an awful lot of hard work into bringing it to life for us and the demonstration. So very much appreciate the presentation, the preparation that you've done. So Alex, really great presentation. Thank you very much. And my thanks also to George and Ian in the background for grouping and asking the questions on behalf of the audience. It's much appreciated. Before we go, I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of up and coming webinars that we've got coming up in the next few weeks, and which are very exciting. The first one is Agile. It's all about the people. That's on the 9th of March, and that's a follow-up from Barbara Roberts to her successful presentation in December. And then on the 30th of March, we've got rolling out gigabit connectivity to 8 million premises by 2025. And that's presented by Clayton Nash, who's the strategy director for City Fibre. So a couple of very interesting webinars coming up, and I encourage you to click on our community site and go through to the registration pages and register for those webinars. And so finally, on behalf of the Anglian Coastal Local Network, the IET Anglian Coastal Local Network, thank you all for joining tonight. Thank you all for your engagement and your questions. And once again, a big thank you to Alex for putting together the presentations and the demo. So that concludes the webinar.